Hi, everybody. Welcome to Immerse Yourself. My name is Julia. I'm the Community Relations Specialist here at the Diving Museum, here to give you a little introduction. So first, I would like to thank this month's sponsor, which is Bill and Jan Whistle. So thank you for sponsoring Immerse Yourself this month, if you guys are watching. For upcoming events, I'm sure you guys have heard, but in March, on March 8th and 9th, we have Vintage Dive Weekend. So we are going to have vintage gear in the water. If you've ever dreamed about diving like Meg Nelson on Sea Hunt or like Jacques Cousteau and using that double hose regulator that they used, we are going to have a day where you guys can use that equipment, go underwater at Jules Undersea Lodge. And then at noon, we're going to have hard hat diving demonstrations. So we're going to have hard hat divers in the water. You can see them in action, see how a helmet worked 100 years ago. So if that is something you are interested in, that is going to be, again, March 8th and 9th, that weekend. You can sign up on our website. The tickets are available. Another upcoming event also in March is our upcoming guided tours. That's going to be the Sunday before St. Patrick's Day on March 16th at 11 and 2 o'clock. If you're a member, good news, the tours are totally free. If you do come in and just get an admission ticket, the tours will be completely included with that admission. So if you want to do a guided tour experience, come join us March 16th at 11 or 2. The last event I'll tell you guys about is next month's Immerse Yourself. That's going to be March 19th on a Wednesday. And that is also March's Members Month. So if you are a member, we invite you to come in on Immerse Yourself night, bring a non-member with you, and if you can get them signed up for a membership, you will get a free gift from us. So come bring all those non-members who've ever had a thought about being a member at the museum and make it official for March Member Month. Next month's Immerse Yourself is going to be with Dr. Corey Convertito of the Key West Art and Historical Society. She's actually going to come in and talk about Ernest Hemingway and his history here in the Keys, as well as his relation to sport fishing, how he inspired other writers to get into it, and how he helped with conservation efforts based on his passion for sport fishing. So that's with Dr. Corey Convertito, March 19th, next month. For this month, on February 19th, I am joined by Mike and Georgann Wachter. They are the authors of Erie Wrecks and Lights, Erie Wrecks East, Erie Wrecks West, and have published a Lake Erie shipwreck chart with over 360 GPS coordinates of different shipwrecks. So they are kind of our shipwreck experts. They are here to speak with us tonight about early hard hat divers, the hazards of that diving, and the influence it had on Great Lakes and Caribbean treasure and salvage work. So without further ado, I'm going to let the watchers take over. Thank you guys for coming and enjoy.
It's wonderful. I haven't heard myself spoken of that well in years.
And I am so pumped. I saw a sawtooth shark today on my way to see the red seahorse.
Pregnant seahorse.
The red pregnant seahorse.
It was next to the pipefish, right?
No, the pipefish, I saw. No, I can't believe it.
It had 3 days. He literally found a pipefish, a pregnant seahorse, and a sawtooth shark. And I was nowhere near anyone else.
Office flounders.
All right, now what do we have in the room?
Couple? Okay.
And how many of you are technical divers? Wear gear like that. All right.
All right.
Those are my kind of people.
Oh, you won't do it anymore.
I will not do it anymore. I have decided I am too old to carry 3 swing bottles, doubles on my back, and try and stand up. However, what we want to do is kind of drag you through some of the history that led up to being able to wear gear like this. So we're going to recognize that while many of us do use mixed gases, we use deco gases, we usually use those for depths in excess of 100 feet if I'm being conservative. But the groundwork was laid by commercial submariners, people who wore those kinds of rigs. And those commercial submariners preceded us in these things. So we want to tell you their story, much through the eyes of Great Lakes divers, but their story, and we call it Armored Warriors of the Deep.
In the early 1800s, brothers John and Charles Dean manufactured the first diving dress out of a copper helmet and leather garment. The idea for the underwater apparatus was born when John Dean grabbed a suit of medieval armor and rushed to rescue some horses that were trapped in a burning stable. Apparently, the suit worked because he survived. Okay. And in 1829, the Deans adapted the fire suit for underwater work. Between 1832 and 1836, Charles recovered 52 cannon from the, I'm sorry, 27 cannon from the wreck of the Royal George.
See, that number just grew.
Oh, it did grow a lot.
Now that we had to include the Royal George because Julie said we had to do a shipwreck.
This vessel was a 100-gun warship that, when built in 1756, was the largest in the world. The Royal George tragically was lost in August of 1782 when she fell over in England's Portsmouth Harbor. That drowned over 800 people, including a lot of women and children who were touring the ship. A short time later, a German, Augustus Seeby, devised a working suit of what he termed medieval armor. His invention and other types of dive suits were compared by British Royal Engineer Charles Hasley. And he selected Seebe's suit, and there it is, and did some additional salvage of the Royal George between 1839 and 1842. Charged with removing this 57-year-old hazard to navigation, he selected Seebe's closed diving dress, where the helmet was actually attached to the leather suit instead of just resting on the shoulders of the diver. The destruction of the hull of the Royal George also involved the first use of underwater explosives. That is actually a scene from Lake Erie, taken from our house when they were installing pipeline. Hard hat diving was brought to the United States around 1841 when Buck Taylor began his diving career in Boston. A large number of shipwrecks in the Great Lakes soon attracted salvage expeditions. One of the early armored warriors began his career literally by an accident.
Johnny Green grew up in Lake Ontario. He had made a part-time living by breath hold diving to salvage goods and drowning victims. Included in his submarine finds were boxes of soap, a stolen clock, and armaments from a gunboat lost in 1812. And he's doing this all with breath hold diving. In July of 1852, he decided to immigrate west with his brother and several family members. Unfortunately, leaving Oswego, New York, from the propeller city of Oswego, they entered Lake Erie, and when approaching Cleveland, a sudden shock awoke Johnny. The steamer America had rammed the Oswego. His vessel sank, taking several family members and all of his possessions to the lake bottom. Johnny used his breath-holding ability to spend several weeks diving for the bodies of his relatives and their personal effects. Nearby, he encountered another disaster site. 2 years before, in June of 1850, the steamer G.P. Griffith had caught fire, killing some 290 immigrants. The intense publicity had brought salvors to the ill-fated vessel, and observing the operation of the diving dress, Johnny boasted of his submarine prowess. On a dare, he descended to the 15-foot deep hull. I mean, this was a really deep dive, 15-foot deep hull. However, he remained underwater longer than the other divers believed was possible. This began his career as an armored submariner, armor meaning wearing brass helmets. Late in 1852, at his suggestion, the diving operation was moved to the steamer Erie in 71 feet of water off Silver Creek, New York. The Erie, lost in 1841, was a richer prize as she carried a good quantity of gold and silver. Descending to the burned-out hull, Johnny found coin fused together by the fire that had consumed the sidewheeler. The publicity around this salvage led to Johnny being contacted by the American Express Company to raise their safe from the sidewheel steamer Atlantic. Now, you may have heard of the Atlantic. A group called Mardive came out of California and arrested the wreck in Canadian waters in order to salvage it. And then it was tied up in the courts for many, many years because it had originally, Mardive found it because they came across a Canadian diver's marker on the wreck. Uh,
However,
However, she was lost in 1852 after a collision with the propeller Ogdensburg. Now, using improved submarine apparel from some New York City divers, Green began to explore the wreck in 150 feet of deep, cold water off Long Point and Lake Erie. At these depths, the pumps not only failed to supply the suit with enough air, but the air supply hoses burst. And for those of you who may not recognize that snippet of video, yes, it was taken right here in the museum. That used to be right outside the diving buoy. It's now hanging in the far back corner. When you get back to the back, hang left, you'll see it hanging up there. The bursting of hoses tended to end the diving operations rather rapidly. So Johnny then returned to retrieve a stash of gold he had hidden underwater on the Erie. So early hard hat divers weren't necessarily the most forthright and honest of people. Later in 1854, he and a Boston-based group raised the sidewheeler using chains under the hull that led to a cylinder on a barge. The chain was wound on the cylinder as derricks winched the Erie off the bottom, and the hull was towed into port for additional wrecking. Clinging to his dreams of gold, Green, in August of 1855, revisited the sidewheel steamer Atlantic in search of the $36,000 in the American Express Company's safe. And the rather sketchy video you're looking at is video of the Atlantic. It does sit in about 150 feet of water, and the visibility is always atrocious. He located the prize, but before he could raise it, he was crippled by an attack of the bends. Several months later, the incapacitated submarine warrior again made a descent on the Atlantic, suffering yet another case of decompression sickness. Soon after that, he heard that another famous diver of the day, Elliot Harrington, had recovered the prize late in June of 1855. Harrington did this wearing a Wells McGowan suit. And for those of you who have not tried this yet, you are going to need a tender. He had 240 pounds of lead to retrieve the
including
fish.
the helmet and the breastplate.
So when you do get the opportunity to try it, if you wear the full rig, it's going to weigh a great deal more than anyone in this room. Okay?
Johnny Green and others were making improvements in the helmets, weighting systems, hoses, and pumps for the diving armor. Meanwhile, Captain Peter Falcone was using his patented procedures to raise vessels from the deep. Instead of winching the vessel to the surface, as was done with the steamer Erie, he proposed floating the vessel with a large number of barrels placed in and around and his operations from the East Coast to the Great Lakes. The sidewheel steamer Morning Star was sunk by collision with the bark Cortland in Lake Erie off of Lorain, Ohio. The 6-year-old vessel and cargo and engines were of great value. Falcone's methods and the underwater lantern he and George Fuller invented were used Porter, who witnessed the salvage operations. And I think this is fascinating. This is from the Cleveland Plain Dealer, July the 10th of 1868. Quote, "The Morning Star lies in 12 fathoms of water. The steamer Relief and the schooner Watchful are anchored alongside." That was the Relief. And that is a diver going down off of the side of the vessel, okay? The Relief carries a windlass on deck operated by a separate engine and 3 of Fuller's improved submarine air engines, 2 of which were on Wednesday, pumping air down to the divers engaged in the wreck. The third, a large one, was used to inflate with air casks used in raising sunken vessels.
And we can't often find imagery for this, so Georgann paints it.
As she lies in a soft bed of mud, there is an additional obstacle to overcome. This is done by boring through the bottom of the hull and blowing out an air chamber in the sand and relieving the suction occasioned by it. Now, the divers, they're an interesting study. The diver's dress is composed of a rubber cloth garment covering his body except his hands. It is clamped by bolts and screws to a copper yoke resting on his shoulders. Two divers go down in the morning at 7 o'clock and work until dinner time, after which others take their place until night. One diver, Mr. Reynolds, was engaged under the guards of the Morning Star, boring into the planks of the hull with an inch auger and putting in iron eye bolts to which it to be fastened the casks to be used in raising her. He worked on a platform for 3 hours without coming up.
60 feet.
This is 65 feet of water, folks. So for the divers here, okay, but then he came up for supper and he was drawn up. He had a talk with Captain Curtis and went down for 2 more hours. No wonder so many of them got banned. That is me actually coming out of the stack of the Morning Star, that previous picture. Okay, and that is a valve on the sides. The machinery on these things is just incredibly huge. Louis Bourriette was engaged in sending freight up from the main deck. He sends it up in a large iron tub. The raising of a sunken vessel is effected by sending down hundreds of casks filled with water. These are placed bung downward and fastened to chains rove through eye bolts inserted in the hull. The air tube is inserted into the casks. The boilers are filled in this same manner. End quote.
Just to prove that this worked, several years ago, our dive club decided we were allowed to raise a 45-foot vessel in a quarry in Ohio. And we did it by putting garbage bags full of ping pong balls on it, and then filling a couple of casks with compressed air, and that sucker popped right off.
The Morning Star was finally raised in the fall of 1868 and towed several miles before she sank again and was abandoned.
A rich prize lay on the floor of Lake Huron, 7 miles off Thunder Bay Island. In August of 1865, the Pewabic collided with a sister ship, the Meteor, sending between 70 and 125 people to their deaths, scattering a huge hoard of copper on the bottom. Expeditions in 1865, 1891, and 1897 recovered some of the copper that ended the lives of several submarine warriors in the daunting 170-foot depths. In 1917, Benjamin Leavitt brought his dive armor to the sunken Pewabic, and one of the partners behind Leavitt and Company was a woman. Margaret Campbell Goodman, billed as the only female diver in the country. She was 4 feet 9 inches, and apparently she did don the submarine armor and descend to the wreck. Margaret, who made 10 hard hat dives that we know of in her career, described bones, skeletons, and bodies preserved for over 50 years on the vessel. The successful salvage was actually carried out with a clamshell bucket. During the 2-year operation that made Margaret famous, 70 tons of copper, a safe, pig iron, 136 hides, and many relics were recovered. The salvage crew even dined on tins of food and well-aged beer from the deep. But remember, this is the Great Lakes. This is cold, fresh water. So if it's down there, it's still good. In 1934, Goodman again made dive news in her quest to find the bark New Brunswick. This vessel sunk in Lake Erie in 1858, supposedly with a walnut cargo, was located by Margaret from an airplane. Unfortunately, a dispute with a descendant of the New Brunswick owners ended this operation.
The most prolific salvors on the lakes were Captains Tom Reed and Jim. Jim pioneered the family business by raising the barge Plymouth at the Straits of Mackinac in 1876. In 1889, the new steamer Philip D. Armour sank in a collision in the St. Clair River. Obtaining a flat lumber barge some 350 feet long, James Reed floated it over the Armour, sank it on the steamer, and chained it to the sunken vessel. By pumping out the barge and attaching large casks to the sides of the Armour, he achieved enough lift to wrench the wreck off the bottom. The Reeds became fixtures in wrecking operations all over the Great Lakes. Though Tom Reed sometimes donned a hard hat, it was his employee and friend, Louis Myers, who did most of the underwater work for the company. Louis and Tom helped identify the floating hull of the Charles S. Price after the November 1913 storm that sent almost 250 sailors to their deaths and grounded or sank 30 ships all over the five Great Lakes, if you can imagine. Quite a catastrophe. So they didn't know what was this ship was floating. There were so many missing. Tom's two attempts to salvage the Charles Price failed. However, Reed Wrecking Company raised scores of other vessels, including the Mataafa at Duluth in 1906, the Moreland in Lake Superior in 1910, the upturned sandsucker Kelly's Island from near Leamington, Ontario in Lake Erie in 1925, and the Ralph Budd on the Keweenaw in Lake Superior in 1929. Among the techniques and equipment used by the Reeds were 30-foot steel pontoons to lift vessels. And in shallow water, cofferdams were built around sunken hulls to effect repairs. As ships became safer, weather forecasting better, and aids to navigation increased, dive operators found work in other areas. Some of these projects were installation and inspection of docks, bridges, dams, breakwalls, and water intakes. While the pay might be steadier, this work was equally hazardous, as one diver, Frank Heffling from Chicago, found out.
Frank had been a race car driver, a biplane wing walker, and as a Hollywood stuntman, he'd even played a deep sea diver. His dive career actually began in 1934 when he dove to salvage cargo from the steamer Wisconsin, sunk 5 years earlier off Kenosha, Wisconsin, in 120 feet of water. This photo actually shows Frank giving a 1-pound package of Jelke margarine to one of the Jelke brothers. It had been submerged in Lake Michigan on the steamer Wisconsin for 5 years and was still edible. He designed safety fittings on air and telephone hoses and adapted some underwater cutting methods to replace acetylene with an oxyhydrogen torch for deeper jobs. This assured him of steady submarine work. Beside construction jobs, Frank actually worked with the U.S. Navy in World War II to recover an SNJ-3C airplane. And in 1955, he removed the tug Helena, sunk at the 103rd Street Pier in the Calumet River. However, it was an incident in 1959 that made front-page headlines for the very much publicity-loving effort.
On what was supposed to be a routine job, Frank was lowered 179 feet down a shaft into a tunnel of water under 79th Street in Chicago. It was January the 29th, and melting snow counted for the 75-foot deep water that halted work on a main tunnel leading to the lakefront filtration plant. Frank's task was to close a waterproof steel door at the base of the shaft. Communicating with his tender, he was able to explain when the job went terribly wrong.
First, I got my hose caught in a heavy waterproof door at the base of the shaft. So I put my right hand into the door to free the hose. The next thing I knew, my hand was wedged in there.
Heflin instinctively tried to free his hand, tearing his suit in the process, allowing freezing water to wick up his right side. Working slowly against the suction, an agonizing 2 hours passed. Although numb, he eventually freed his hand, only to have the coxswain's chair used to lower him into the tunnel, sucked into the door opening. Tugging on his means of escape, he accidentally wedged his knee in the small bypass gate opening. By now, a call had gone out to the Chicago Fire Department and a pair of ex-Navy divers. Since the frozen diver's long immersion was likely to give him a case of the bends, the fire department began pumping the 75-foot deep water from the shaft. Meanwhile, Frank's tender harangued him in an attempt to keep the hypothermic diver functioning so he would not fall sideways and fill his helmet.
The two rescue divers, Mr. Fletcher and Mercer, were lowered down the shaft in a muck bucket, usually used to drag up sediment. Coming upon Hefling in the murky darkness, they relayed encouragement to the injured diver through their separate tenders. So recognize they can't talk to each other down there. One diver talks to his tender talks to the other tender, that tender relays the message back down. As some 200 bystanders and rescue personnel listened, they wrestled to free Frank, when suddenly he cried out in pain. The rescue was simply not working. A new plan was devised to tie a line around Frank and haul him free. How do you think that worked? Oh, yeah. Frank realized that was doing nothing but tear him apart, so he screamed at his helmet for them to stop. 5 hours had passed, 2 rescue plans had failed. A decision was made to lower a hydraulic jack to lift the gate. By now, the fire department had managed to draw 40 feet of water and had a hyperbaric tanker at the ready. Mercer and Fletcher wrestled underwater with the jack, finally moving the 5-ton gate and freeing Frank. The ordeal was not over, since now the immobile diver had to be lifted into the metal muck bucket for the ascent to the surface. 45 minutes after he was free, Hefley's helmet was finally unscrewed to the cheers of rescuers and the flash of photographers' bulbs. So this is a real safe hobby that we have. Learn that thing. Unfortunately, 4 years later, Frank Hefling lost his life when inspecting a pipeline in only 30 feet of water at East Chicago, Illinois, when the propeller of the dive craft severed his hose.
Now, we do have a minor experience with commercial equipment. This took place in Toronto at the Canadian Underwater Dive School, which was located on a ship that was docked in Toronto Harbor. We were able to try the Superlight, the Aquadyne helmets, the Mark V helmet. I didn't do that actually. Down in a hyperbaric chamber twice to feel the effects of that. I, for one, had a very exciting time since I almost drowned. Be aware. Okay, because of too small of a neck dam.
I have video of her almost drowning, and I love showing that. Now, the air's not on in the helmet yet. So if you're at all claustrophobic, this is not a fun experience.
Yes. And I had water spraying in my helmet and slowly coming up. 20 foot to the bottom.
Yeah. So the tank on your back is strictly an emergency tank. You're getting air fed from the surface.
It's all right now, one thing. Number 2, how you doing? Sounds like you're still getting water in your helmet. Slow up. So I think that a little too dull for it. Yeah. Okay. Bigger.
We were also able to try underwater welding inside the hold of the ship. So that was,
And it was that tank on the back that actually saved her because the neck dam was too small. The helmet was filling with water. And as she's going, there's water in the helmet. What did he say?
he said, Lassie, you'll drown. Yeah, he was Scottish, I believe. And I went, okay.
Come on, Lassie.
Well, Lassie, you'll drown.
And this is the Mark V rig. They put you in this, and yes, it had the whole 248 pounds of lead on it with the shoes and everything else. Then they hook a crane to you, and they lift you into the hull of the boat and lower you down. And you hope you don't hit a girder, because that can be very uncomfortable for a guy. Now, modern commercial divers use lighter weight helmets, occasionally scuba rigs, some sophisticated breathing mixes tailored to the job. But portable hyperbaric chambers are also available to lock the diver down immediately after submersion to increase their safety. Many inspection jobs are actually done with cameras mounted on remotely operated vehicles, but the fixing of a problem still falls to the commercial diver, the armored warrior, and his crew, or her crew, as the case may be. I was fascinated because as we were researching this, we came upon the manual for divers from the Naval Torpedo Station in Washington, D.C., dated 1905. And in this manual, there's a chapter that talks about requirements for divers. And some of the better requirements, if I can see this well enough to read it, not to be very pale, nor have lips more blue than red. In other words, you really ought to have good blood circulation. It goes on to say that you should not be hard drinkers. That rules out most of the people in this room. Nor have suffered frequently from, or severely at least, from venereal disease, or to have sunstroke or rheumatism. And then my favorite one, men who have long trunks with well-developed chests and loins generally make good divers. This is clearly before DEI.
Well, the experimentation and innovations of C.B. Falcon, Fuller, and the Reeds and others have advanced diving, especially technical diving today. These submarine warriors took the risks in a new environment to rescue millions of dollars in vessels and property and build hundreds of installations around the salt and freshwater seas. In the process, these deep sea pioneers developed the techniques, equipment, and air mixes that are the foundation for technical diving today.
And some of you may notice this particular piece of equipment. Anybody recognize it?
Maybe right off Key Largo. That's the underwater habitat.
Underwater habitat. And they're designed specifically to allow the diver to stay down for extended periods of time and not have to come back up to the surface frequently. But all of that put together makes it so that sport divers like us can dress like this.
Uh-huh.
Right. And I have to tell you a story. I met a delightful lady named Sally while we were doing an early version of this program in Philadelphia aboard a
Noisy.
New Jersey. So we were aboard the New Jersey, the battleship New Jersey.
Yeah.
And Sally came up to me after the program. She said, I really like that program. You are going to come down. It was not an invitation. It was an order. You are going to come down and do this at my museum, but you're going to give me credit. So, yes, a lot of the imagery that is in this program was taken right back here. If you have not been through this museum, you have missed a treat and a treasure. It is one of the most fabulous facilities of its kind anywhere on the world. Trust me, we travel, we go to the best. We would be happy to answer any questions you may have, although I expect there are people in this room who have built submersibles and gone down to the Edmund Fitzgerald that might know better than I. So we'll call on your expertise as well. Questions, comments, remarks? Yes.
There's some images of people with all this gear on and the heavy shoes walking down the steps into the water. Were they wearing 240-pound gear you're speaking about?
The
Trust me.
question was that we had images of people who had all this gear on. I'm doing this for the microphone and the Zoom people. And with 248 pounds of lead, are they walking down the stairs with that? The simple answer is yes. Remember, men with, strong chests and well-developed loins.
I declined, especially after I almost drowned, to put on the equipment. The helmet is 35 pounds. The breastplate is another 35 pounds. Each shoe was
Shoes are 75 pounds.
no, I think they were 14 pounds each.
Okay.
The diving dress, plus you're wearing 50 pounds of lead here. Okay, and the diving dress, the weight of itself. I said, and stand up too.
Yeah.
Okay,
Now, they would also put you on what looks like a swing, a
yes.
wooden swing, and lower you down that.
Lower down.
But more often than not, you went down the ladder the same way we did when we tried it.
You saw the,
And back
Yeah,
up.
back up.
Yes, yeah.
but that's why they do have they had a chair, and there was an illustration or two of a chair or a platform lowering the diver.
Yes.
In the water, were you neutral at that point? It just seems like almost, why would you so much?
Question is, in the water, were you neutral? No, you were not neutral. The idea behind,
Everywhere, I mean, it just seems
yeah,
like.
the idea was to walk on the bottom, literally to walk on the bottom. You did not swim. You walked around.
Yeah.
And so the weight was intended to make sure that you didn't float.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That neutral buoyancy is something that came along with the advent of scuba diving.
Yes.
I mean, not neutral is what I mean, but I mean, it's like, that's a lot of weight.
The whole
Oh,
dress.
yeah.
It seems almost overkill.
Imagine the damage that would do to the reef.
Okay,
Yeah.
It's really.
But the point is for salvage, not for going in.
No, I'm saying if there's mud.
Different.
So the comment
Walking through the mud.
Well-
I mean, it's just.
comment from the audience was the point is it's for salvage, not for recreational, for sport. So these people are down there on a working dive, usually in one position for an extended period of time.
They're welding, or they're doing something else. And they do have a line to haul them up. Like if you're talking soft mud, when we did it, that was a hard packed surface in Toronto Harbor. I can't test. In Lake Erie, you go, because there's a lot of mud on the bottom.
Or silt bottom lake.
It's much of it's silt bottom.
Now I do have to mention Johnny Green at one time also went to the Silver Banks down here. And I was supposed to include that in the talk, but I couldn't figure it out in the timeline because we forgot to bring his book with us. Other questions?
Yes.
When they were first starting to develop hard hat diving, those quake depths for long time periods, was it around the same time that like Haldane was doing his stuff and developing treatments for DCS?
Haldane is a little later in time.
Like, how did they develop the treatment for, or even like, did they even talk about DCS hits back in the beginning? Was it just like, that's too bad, buddy, you're gonna growth off, or was it just like, how do they treat it?
In the early days, it was that's too bad, buddy. We did not know what caused it.
Post it
We didn't know the physics behind it. Haldane came much later. So that when we told you the stories of Johnny Green on the Atlantic, that's well before we knew enough about the physics to know what was going on. When we got up to Heffling in Chicago, by then we at least knew what DCS was. We were calling it caissons disease by then, largely because of what?
Bridge.
Brooklyn Bridge. Okay, and the overseas railway.
Yeah.
All right.
Yes.
They have a lot of caisson disease research was actually done during the building of the overseas railway right down here.
Yes. So
Anybody else?
I'm curious, where do you guys live now?
The question is where we live now.
Yeah.
We live in Cleveland, Ohio,
off of,
where it's snowing and 2 degrees.
yeah.
Boy, are we glad to be down here.
However, about 3 months of the year we spend in
We
Island.
spent 3 months here.
Yeah. So we're
Right up the street at Executive Bay Club, January, February.
We're originally from Columbus.
Okay.
yeah.
So,
So-
and our
we
books,
may know some people that you do.
Yeah, our research and our books focus on Lake Erie and the Great Lakes, Lake Erie specifically, the Great Lakes in general. So when you were talking about the Edmund Fitzgerald, I can talk to you about that all night.
Well, I say that I dove it because one day on a girlfriend's birthday, we found it. We called up a famous diver and said, "We're on Lake Huron. Do you know where it is?" And he said,
We
"Yeah, I
happen
can
to have
get you
a
on.
GPS
Oh,
number."
you happen to have a GPS number?" And it was like this on Lake Huron. And we both stuck our toe in the water over the fence, but we have
That's 550 feet to the bottom,
Yeah.
and we did not have any technical.
We decided
And
we
we were
weren't diving.
550.
We weren't going to dive it that day. Only one person has ever
Drove it on scuba gear, and he should have died.
He should have died.
His regulators froze on his ascent. His safety divers were able to bring fresh tanks down to him. He had a severe case of hypothermia and was hospitalized on completion of the dive. He did a 4-hour dive and literally went down and touched the wreck and started his ascent. I don't need those kind of bragging rights.
Everybody clap.
Yeah, somebody should have clapped him in the head. Did I say that out loud? Is that right?
Where's your outlook?
I hate when that happens.
So, yes, sir.
Would you mind if I answered a couple of his questions?
Please do.
Please
Yeah.
answer some of his questions.
Regarding decompression,
John.
if you read some stuff about the Greek sponge divers.
Okay.
Up so you're near the fire.
Well, that will go.
That's as far as it's gonna get.
So just.
Right there, John. Don't have to hold it, just stand by.
Okay, if you,
Restate the statement and then announce yourself so people that are on Zoom know who you are.
okay.
Please.
Well, my name's John Hazelbaker, and I was a commercial diver in Ohio for over 30 years. And I love diving history. So, all I want to tell you, you asked questions about early decompression. If you read some stuff about the Greek sponge divers, they thought, and this happened in the early 1900s. So, and they were a little bit behind, but they believed packing the guys in ice when they started feeling they had the bends. All right. And of course, they had no regard for decompression tables at all. They'd get down to the bottom and they'd walk miles on the bottom in 60, 70 feet of water. So I actually had an opportunity to dive with the Greek sponge divers back in the 70s, and they were still doing the same thing, getting down and walking on the bottom. My turn to dive, we were diving at 60 feet of water, and I said, in 55 minutes, I'm coming up, So anyway, and I got chastised for that.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Sure, but
The other thing you were asking about the buoyancy, even the Mark V gear, which weighs about 200 pounds.
Thank you.
Helium
Have a good
equipment
day.
weighs about 240, but the Mark V gear, one of the things they train you is and they fear is getting overly buoyant. So it has a capacity, if you don't control your exhaust valve and your air intake, which hangs right here, your air inlet valve, you can blow up, uncontrolled blow up on the surface. And when that happens, you lose all control of your arms. You can't get to the exhaust valve. You can't get the air inlet
They're just a big
intake.
giant balloon.
And then that suit can bust. Yeah. So, but you guys are right. They do have to work heavy. That's why you're wearing that weight. You're working on the bottom. And a lot of work for the diver. You're working basically on your knees or very low to the bottom to keep out of the current and that type of thing. So
I'm
anyway,
sure you've all seen the cartoon of the human fully stuffed into the helmet, the hard helmet. That's what you look like after that emergency.
yeah.
So thank you.
All
I
right.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
No, please. I know there's more expertise in this room than we have up front. So
And if anybody has further questions, we would be very happy to hang around and answer
be here
them.
for a while.
And we'll be here for a while.
But at this point, I'm going to turn it over to the boss.
We're going to turn it off.
Well, she's sitting in the back.
Good catch.
Hello, everybody. I'm Lisa Mangili. I'm the executive director. You already met Julia, who is handling all of our media. She's our community relations
She did
specialist.
magic making this work, I want to tell you.
She did. Do we have any questions online?
Yes, David Lefevre wanted to know if there was such thing as an introductory helmet diving course that he could take.
David Lefevre wanted to know if there was an introductory helmet diving course that you could take. And there is even one here in the Keys. Is David in the Keys? Do we know?
David, is in the Keys.
Okay.
And, yeah.
Do you want to tell us about the dive you're going to make?
Gonna do it on Monday.
Oh, you're going to do it? Okay.
So actually, one of
Lifting.
There's also one in Canada.
the History of Diving Museum, one of our board members has a Mark V dive experience that you can do in Jules Undersea Lodge.
Yeah.
So if you have any information or you want some information, feel free to reach out to us and we'll connect you with Sharky. And yes, one of our attendees here, Laura Lee, is going to do it on Monday. Yes.
Good for you. Good for you.
Sideways.
No, I know, I'm not planning to.
No stage.
No.
Yeah.
We're climbing down the ladder with all that gear.
Julia, do we have another question? Yes.
Apparently no.
No? Okay, so if you do, put them in, or if you're watching this recording later on our History of Diving Museum YouTube channel, you can write it into the comments. We do monitor those. We'll get back
Lisa
to
knows how to find us.
yes, and we'll see if we can get that answered for you. So we
you
would
for
like to
having us.
thank you both for coming down. We appreciate you. So normally for our speakers, we give them a 1-year membership to the History of Diving Museum, which allows them to come in 362 days a year. They're pretty proud card carrying members.
We are only too happy to support your efforts.
So we are going to extend that membership, and we also have a little gift bag
you.
with a little treat from the History of Diving Museum. So
That's
we look forward to diving with you while you're in town, and thanks for being here tonight. Again, if anybody has any questions, they'll be hanging around. We also do have some of your books that are signed that are still in the museum store if anybody wants to pick those up. All right.
and
Thanks
those
so much.
proceeds all go to the museum. So please buy a book.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your attention this evening. It's been great fun.
All right.